Hi everyone, my name is Vanessa Valiuco, and welcome back to Personal Pans, conversations about belief, transformation, and all the weird and wonderful things that we experience. Today's episode is part 2 of my conversation with Steph Fowler. Steph is the founder of Inkwell Psychotherapy. She is a therapist for weirdos and misfits and neurodivergent folks and cycle disruptors. She's also one of my favorite people on the planet. In part 1, we talked about her working in a haunted office and what it means to be a therapist for weirdos. In part 2, pretty intense. If you've ever heard me mention my friend with long COVID on this podcast, that's Steph. And she spoke very frankly about what it's like to have long COVID, what it's like to be in a body that is no longer the body that you remember. We talked about eating disorders and being evangelical and multiple systems of oppression and what it means to interrogate those systems. Content warning, I guess, because we do talk about eating disorders and fatphobia and child abuse, and we have a pretty frank discussion about what it's like to be a medical mystery and failed by doctors over and over again. So be advised. But Steph has an incredible breadth and fluency in so many different subjects and really knows how to tie all things together in terms of the lens of, like I said, capitalism, multiple forms of oppression and marginalization. I don't know. I love the hell out of this conversation, and I hope you do as well.
And there's this fear. This is the rant that I was coming up with in the shower today. This idea that people are terrified of having biases identified, and the conversation about privilege. And it's like, having privilege doesn't erase the things that you have done in a particular field. It does mean that you got noticed because of privilege in certain areas, right? I'm a white woman. There are certain things I do not ever have, I will never have to fucking deal with in my life. Like, there are certain things I just have never had to worry about, but there are also things that I think about because, as crazy as my mother is, she talked very openly about, again, she had eating disorders her whole life. So like, first she was anorexic, rail thin, got attention all the time, again, got opportunities for modeling and for dancing and all of that, because people just saw her on the street and wanted her in something. And then after she had me, she gained a bunch of weight and suddenly she was erased. And she would tell me that people wouldn't even look her directly in the eye anymore. And so she had this perspective from being in those two worlds and was constantly telling me what that was like.
Yeah.
So even if I hadn't talked about this in college, I know this is a thing. Like, you have this narrow way of existing that you're supposed to exist. And if you do exist that way, you get benefits that other people don't. That's just reality.
That is reality. And I think inherent in there, at least for me, and I know I'm not alone in this, is the anxiety of losing it.
Yes.
That like, since having long COVID, there's a whole bunch of stuff that is changing in my body. Some of that includes not being able to be as active as I'm used to being. So I have put on some weight. Is it significant? Not really, but I feel it. And there is this anxiety that grows because I know that I have walked through the world within privilege. I know that I have had that praised by people for much of my life. And I know everything else that I have heard about the alternative. And I don't want, there's this part of me that fears losing that privilege, in part of not just how I move through the world, but as somebody who is now accessing medical care. The only reason that I think I got to my long COVID diagnosis as quickly as I did, which was not quick, is because I am thin. And I know people who are not living in a body like mine have to deal with that fat phobia, multiple layers that I did not have to deal with.
Oh my God. Oh my God, Steph. Oh my God. This is, so again, there's so much I want to say, but the first thing I want to say is that, again, even when you have an awareness, as I do, of thin privilege and fat phobia and all of that, and bias in the medical system, I didn't think about that. right? Because I have not had to think about that.
Mhm.
But I have heavy friends who talk about this all the time, that
Mhm.
the first thing that happens when you go to the doctor is they tell you to lose weight. And they think that weight, a lot of doctors think that weight is the cause
Is
of
health.
everything.
Yep.
Yes,
Yep.
yes, exactly. Yeah, thin is healthy. And all you have to do, well, just lose weight first,
Yep.
and then and it's like, why don't you just actually look at the person and their symptoms? And this too, I should just write notes for the things I want to talk about, because another thing that I want to talk about that you bring up now with long COVID, I think it connects to how we look at thin people, and it's also how we look at healthy people, the moralizing of
Absolutely.
thinness and health, that somehow both of those equate to being a good person, and
Mhm.
how, again, being unhealthy or disabled
Mhm.
or fat are equated with being a bad person,
Yep.
somebody that you don't want to be around. This perception of disability and unhealthiness as contagious somehow, even when it's a stable condition, right? It's
Yeah.
just like, I don't want
Yeah.
to be around this. And
Yeah.
again, how that gets trained into us so early,
Yeah.
that it is really hard to deconstruct and move outside of.
Absolutely. And even like as I was having Thanksgiving, there are those like food things that start to creep in that I have not had any like real eating disorder type stuff. But there is this thing that has been interesting about, as I am coming to terms with what my body is and is not capable of doing, and as I'm coming to terms with a new normal of figuring this out and realizing that some of this stuff is going to be around for this foreseeable future, that I can't wait for some of these things to go away or get better. They may not, or if they do, it's going to be a while. There is a lack of control that comes with that. And one of the responses to that is food restriction. And am I restricting? No, but I feel like the thoughts and the like, do you really wanna? What? Well, you can't just like burn it off anymore. You can't just go work it out, like do a workout after eating so much. You can't do these things. Your body can't do those things. So are you sure you want to eat so much that like I have to push back against? I have to be conscious of in a way that has not come up, but this is like such a prime example of intersectional everything of thin privilege and fat phobia and ableism and healthism, and all of these things are so interconnected that to try to take any of those in a vacuum is a disservice to everyone.
I'm even going to go so far as to say it's morally irresponsible,
I
right?
agree. No, 1000%.
Especially too, and this was the note I was taking, this idea of trauma, and especially trauma to the body, and how often that leads to seeking out methods of control.
Yep.
Again, it's not a surprise, and this is in the literature if anybody needs a study about people who experience physical but usually sexual abuse in childhood, and then developing later eating disorders, or even eating disorders in childhood, because
Yeah.
you are
Yep.
looking for ways to control your body and feel in control of your body. And what is the easiest thing that we all have access to, no matter how rich or poor you are? You have food, right?
Mhm.
Again, it's harder when you're poor because you have less access to that. But food is a necessity. Food is there. It's different than any other kind of drug
Yep.
that you can use to numb yourself. It
Yep.
is something that you have every day in order to survive. So of course you're going
Yep.
to start controlling it in whatever way you can in order to feel some sort of control in the chaos of the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as a kid, what other agency do you have? Almost none.
None.
Like,
Exactly.
none.
Yeah, exactly.
So, right. Like
Right.
that, there's that. And then there's the flip side, which I end up seeing a lot and talking to clients about, is it's so insidious and sad how this happens, that the only other control we have is the meaning that we make of things. And that if there is like the tension in a parent relationship, if it is whatever is happening in the house, if I make the meeting, it's about me, I'm bad, then I have control to be able to fix this thing.
Oh my God. And again, this is all the work of Alice Miller. All of what, 7 of her books right there. Because it is so, I mean, again, how hard it is to be a kid and your brain still hasn't fully functioned. You haven't developed fine motor skills yet, and you are trying to make sense of the people who are supposed to be protecting you and giving you boundaries and setting you and teaching you how to be a human being are abusing you. So of course it's my fault, right? Or for again, that's another one of her books, right? For your own good, right? It's happening for my own good. This is training me, right? To train a child. Look, I'm like, let me just read off all of her her book titles. That idea of, again, like you said, that meaning making, and then the chaos and pain that causes later on in life when you carry those narratives with you. Again, that's drama, the gifted child. You take personal responsibility of certain things in order to feel control in a chaotic environment, but then you go out into the world and you are reproducing these same systems of cycles of trauma out into the world because you think all relationships are like that, and you still think you're responsible. My mind's already blown.
No, this is where I talk to people about gaslighting and about how we gaslight ourselves when we have been gaslit early in life, that we then continue that because that's again how we have made meaning, is that if it can't be about anyone else's behavior, if it can't be about anyone else's choices, it's only about mine, then I've got to fix me. As long as I fix me, as long as I do enough, as long as I change, as long as I whatever, then I can maintain this connection, which is also this like evolutionary nervous system thing where as young children, we need that co-regulation, we need that safety, we need that model for if I am not okay, that is okay. And there I can be contained and supported. If you don't have that, then our nervous system is constantly like, am I okay? Do I have people? Do I have support? Am I going to be on my own? And that will carry with people the same way in that meaning making is, well, I need to maintain connection at all costs. When you're a kid, we know we have to maintain relationship with our caregiver because we can't survive on our own. And when that's imprinted in such a way when you're so young, then you carry that, excuse me, you carry that with you. And that can then lead to the same cycle in other relationships of, I am not okay unless I can maintain this connection. So I've got to twist and contort and people please and whatever to maintain this connection versus I am responsible for my stuff. They're responsible for their stuff. We meet in the middle. We have a relationship where we are each bringing things, but we are also both responsible for our individual selves as part of the relationship.
Yes, this idea that a single person doesn't have to carry the full relationship, and that if you are, even if you're carrying 75%, unless somebody else is carrying 75% some of the time too, because sometimes you are depleted in a certain way. If it's not evened out, that is I hate the word toxic throwing that around, but that's not probably the healthiest relationship. If you're the one who has to keep doing the work. And if you were trained, as I was, that it is my responsibility to help regulate all the adults in my life, but nobody was there to help me regulate when I felt anxious or insecure or emotionally abandoned. And the havoc that wreaks on a nervous system. Again, I don't think it's a surprise that people with higher incidence of chronic illness also have higher ACE scores. Like our bodies are responding again because we're unable to release that trauma, because we're unable to express that trauma, because as you said, you are surrounded by caretakers who have no interest in listening or acknowledging any of your pain because they don't know how to manage their own pain. And so then you're just this kind of ball of nerves walking through life trying to make sense of things. And again, that constant fear of this is just all going to fall apart at any minute.
Well, so sorry.
No, please go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say, because I feel like that leads right into that's the priming, like you're primed for that. Then if you're like me and you ended up in the church, then you've got the next phase of reinforcement of anything bad is your fault. Anything bad you need to be praying about, you need to be like asking for forgiveness, you need to be whatever. If you're depressed or anxious or whatever, there's something wrong that you are not dealing with. It is obviously a you problem. So that is just another layer before we even get into adulthood and relationships.
Let's dive into this because, again, you are one of the many ex-evangelicals I've had on this show. But the first thing I want to mention, I'm glad you're segueing into this, because as you're talking about this, not only the church, but also society as a whole, again, that pull you up by the bootstraps, that Calvinist ideology.
It's all,
again, like you said, intersecting. Like again, in my feminism classes in college, we talked about multiple marginalities and, again, intersecting systems of oppression. It's all there. You might not have grown up evangelical. Guess what? That Calvinist ideology is wrapped up in capitalism, and you bet you know what the capitalist ideal is, baby. You know it, because when you don't meet it, you feel bad. Why do you feel bad? Because they're telling you that you're bad.
Because it's all moralized.
It's all moralized. Well, and that, getting back to the church, right? This idea that, again, if you're depressed or if you're angry, again, even if you're angry, that is a natural human emotion. But any of these things, any doubt, all of that, it's all the devil. It's the devil. And there is an inherent spiritual weakness in you that is allowing the devil to sneak in and get its hooks in you and try to pull you away from the church, which is the only source of truth and information in the universe, period.
And as you're talking, sometimes it is amazing to me how long I bought that. Like I say that with the caveat that there was always a part of me that was pushing back. So I was not 1000% drinking the Kool-Aid, but it was very much so, to the point that I went and got, a double major in biblical studies and ministry, which is the fun fact that most people who know me as an adult, they're like, you what now? That like, that's how deep I was in. But also just like, I don't know, I was always the troublemaker in youth group that was like, when they would be some sermon about whatever, some topic in youth group, and homosexuality was a big deal in the late 90s when I was in youth group, and in part because my denomination there was a split happening over whether or not the pastors were allowed to be gay or not. So it was talked about a lot. And I was the kid in youth group that was like, so I'm still not like convinced it's a sin, but let's just say for the sake of argument, it is a sin. Tell me, what if all of our sins are being forgiven? Why is this a problem? Like, how is it that that's the worst sin that like can't be forgiven or something? And there's whatever the verse is about, like blasphemy of the Holy Spirit is like the unforgivable sin, whatever. I'm like, that ain't it. So what are we talking about here? Why is this? But so there's always part of me that was like pushing buttons and pushing back. And I did some paper in my college years about how homosexuality was not a sin. Like, it was really fascinating. It's still fascinating to me though, that as deep as I got into it and as much as I really absorbed all of that guilt and shame and all of this reasoning that I have to be the problem and fix everything, the thing that started to unravel it, I think, was actually going and getting that degree, because part of the process was getting into the Bible and picking things apart and understanding the context in which books were written. And I didn't totally get all of it at that time, because again, like I was 20, my brain's not still fully developed for another several years. But it like started to plant the seeds of context of like, can we talk about the fact that all of these authors are men, and maybe why that is, and maybe why all of their stances on women were what they were, and who benefited from that, and all of everything involved in that, which most evangelicals don't look at.
Right. Well, I mean, that was the same thing Holly talked about.
Yeah.
And just once you dive into the text, again, I remember being 14 or so, or whenever I learned about the Council of Nicene, I was like, hold up, hold up, because again, my mother's evangelical, and being raised, at least she believed that the Bible is the true word of God, right? The revelation that is given to people. It's like, wait a minute. So, if you want to believe this one book was divinely inspired and given, it's like, what about the guys who edited it? Because there were literally hundreds of gospels around at that time, and a group of guys decided, like, oh no, these are the true books. But then all you have to do is look at any of the work by Bart Ehrman to see, like, oh, okay, this is interesting. Even the books that we decide are more authentic, all you have to do is do some textual analysis of them. Of course, I'm going to forget which book now, but there's one book that is specifically using rhetorical devices from Greece from like 200 CE, could not have been the true revealed word of whatever apostle they want to claim it is. Like, as soon as you start peeling back all those layers, like, wait a minute, there is actual historical data here that shows that whatever we are being taught is completely incorrect.
Yeah. Yep.
So, yeah.
As you're talking, I was trying to pull up this account on Instagram, because this is my
Yes.
life now.
Of course.
Because I want to give it credit where it's due. I think
Yeah.
it was this account. Yeah, no, it is. On Instagram, it's Nalgona Positivity Pride. And they post a lot about the intersections of religious trauma, eating disorders, all of these things. And I think it was this account where I first saw them put it so clearly. God was my first abusive relationship. Like, when that is the model that you have of hierarchy, patriarchy, and it is me, I am a problem, I must do all of the things in order to absolve myself, earn forgiveness, earn my place, earn just recognition, earn basic existence without shame. Like, that sets the tone for people to put up with a lot, sets the tone for taking on a lot, sets the tone for not expecting anything.
God.
And I just wanted to mention them, because that was like the most clear. I was like, oh, there it is. That's it. That's in a nutshell.
And again, I'm constantly referring back to Alice Miller, but she writes about this as well. And on top of all of those things that you mentioned, this idea that God works in mysterious ways. So, and isn't that what it's like when you are in a relationship with somebody abusive, that you are trying to figure out their behavior and their triggers and all of these things, and it doesn't make any sense because they're acting irrationally, and then you're being told in your religion, well, that's how God is. It's just part of his plan. We don't understand why terrible things happen. So you just learn to accept abuse because that's got to be part of God's plan. God's testing me.
Yeah.
God's trying to test my faith and prove that I can endure these things, because enduring trauma in one way or another somehow makes me more holy.
Also, God will not give you more than you can handle.
Oh, I hate that I hate that phrase more than anything else.
Oh.
And I'm filled with hate. So that's really saying something. That makes me furious, right? Right. Because again, going back to this idea of like the singular model of all of these things, right? God doesn't give you more than you can handle. So if you crack under the pressure, it's your fault because you don't have character.
You're doing something wrong.
You're
not praying enough. You're not.
You let the devil in. Exactly.
Yep.
Oh my God.
Had another thought and I've already lost it.
This is why I take notes now. I just have to.
I have some in front of me, but I didn't write it down fast enough. In any case. Oh, I know what it is. Debating how much to say about this, because this is still my life. We could spend a lot of time off the record about how that's reinforced then in the what a wife is supposed to take from her husband. of you don't dare question, you don't dare whatever, and how like that was really the biggest unraveling for me of my let's call it faith. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but that when I was dealing with a relationship that I was getting out of, the way that it was just reinforced by people in the church that I knew, of like, there was no asking me what was going on, what I had experienced. There was no, it sounds like, you know, the fact that you want to leave is so significant. Can we get coffee? Can we talk about what's going on? Can I support you? It was, well, you know that that's wrong, and that you need to pray more about it, and you need to be doing all of these things to default to defer to. And that was like the end for me, was okay. So I in hindsight, I realized that a lot of my involvement with the church was looking for a community, as a weirdo, as a misfit, as somebody who did not feel like they fit anywhere. That was really what I was hoping for and wanting from my involvement with the church. And yet it just came at so many costs and so many strings attached. And then when it was that clear as day about all of the conditions that were being put on my belonging, it's like, no, we're done here. And it wasn't just like one person, it was like a ton of people.
It's the whole thing. I don't know if you listened to the episode with Hannah, but it was a similar kind of
I didn't
thing.
make it to that one yet.
It's another good one. I think you'll appreciate it. But again, when her parents got divorced, and the when the norms are violated, you don't realize how easily it is for your entire community to shun you. Because if you're going along, again, this idea of conditions, I think about this a lot. Again, my mother's evangelical, and that idea, to me, it's conditional love, right? Like, I think a lot of people get involved in the church, especially later, when they haven't felt any kind of love from their families growing up, that just a lot of like toxic abusiveness, and they're looking for that community. Like you said, they're looking for people that they can be a part of. But you got to follow all the rules. You got to follow all the rules and all these unspoken rules. And again, when you violate them, they're not going to look at you as a person. What does this person need in this moment? What are you as a rule violator? How can I get you to fall back in line? Because again, if you start doing things that are outside of all of these arcane Byzantine rules that we are expected to be a part of at all and follow at all times, because if we don't, we're not godly and we're going to hell. And then somebody else does it. Oh, does that throw into question my entire life and my entire belief system and every choice that I have made to affirm suffering over living? Oh, I can't handle that. And you can't do it either. So you got to get back into this church, and we got to get you back in line. And I'm going to do that by gaslighting you, blaming you for everything that's happening. Well, what are you doing to provoke the situation? I'm just trying to live my life. I am bad because I'm actually pointing out this incredibly toxic, abusive system that we have all conspired into believing. Again, we talk about a lot of these, like, you know, LDS and other communities for being, you know, cultish. It is happening everywhere at all times.
No, that's why I said, like, that's why I made the reference to drinking the Kool-Aid, because it's the same.
It's the same. Yeah.
It's the line between them is very thin depending on the person. Are there people who exist as Christians who do question things, who do not blindly accept things? Yes. I think they are in the minority. I think that I don't know how they do it. I would be really curious to have some conversations about how they reconcile some of these things. Because for me, it was like, finally, the straw that broke the camel's back was like, I can't stop making excuses for things that never felt okay to me. Like the treatment of gay people, the treatment of women, the treatment of all of these things and all of these rules and all of the oppression that was happening, that was under the guise of godliness, under the guise of whatever, that never felt okay, but I was willing to believe whatever they were saying about their reasoning, which I don't even remember what it is now. But at some point, I was like, nah, I'm done making excuses for everybody, for them, for the church, for the person I was in the relationship, for all of this stuff, done. But also, this idea of daring to buck the trend and severing ties and all of this. In my most generous state, the reason that relationship didn't work is that we both wanted each other to be different people. Even that could never have been acknowledged in a positive way by the church. Like, there was this expectation that you should force and contort and make yourself be okay with something. Like, I just equate it to some cost fallacy of like, you said you were going to do this thing and you've been doing it for so long, and there's no wiggle room. There's no understanding for people who get together in their 20s might outgrow each other, might not end up wanting the same things or being able to be all of the things that they want from each other. And could that can't be okay though under that system.
Yeah. Well, and again, when you have this idea that God is making everything happen, God doesn't get anything wrong. And also this idea that personal sacrifice is holy, that it is godly, that it is your way to heaven. How dare you affirm the self? How dare you?
Of the devil.
And again, like you said, that sunk cost fallacy, because so many people, especially if they've been raised in the church, they've just gotten so used to this, and again, used to that suffering, and have convinced themselves it's holy. I don't necessarily believe a lot of people actually believe it. They have to keep doubling down because they don't want to lose their community. They don't want to lose that sense of security and safety.
That's right. Yep.
And I always
family relationships, or everybody who's tied into that. Yeah.
That too. I think it is amazing anytime anyone ever leaves. I truly do, because we also don't live in a society that fosters any kind of support or respect for truly independent thought. Again, it goes all the way back to Tocqueville. I think I mentioned this in a episode before, but he came to America and he was like, oh my God, this is incredible. All these people, they're doing all these different things. And then he spent some time and he was like, wait a minute. Hold up. They have a lot of choices, but if you suggest anything outside those pre-approved choices, you are shunned. You are shunned. We can't even talk about that. We're scared to talk about these things. And it's a similar kind of thing too. It's like, oh, cool. If you want to buy anything, you can buy anything. If you want any kind of job, you can have any kind of job. But God forbid you talk about, hey, is this really the best way of human community that we can think of right now? And it's not even like capitalism versus socialism debate. It's even going beyond that false binary. Like, how do we really want to be interacting in the world with the environment, with each other? Any of that serious questioning, they're going to think you're off your rocker. A lot of people treat you like you are, or you're some sort of false utopian, when you're just trying to talk about like, hey, maybe there's a better way of doing this. A lot of people seem really miserable, and there seems to be a huge social cost and human cost for keeping this machine running that's really only benefiting the people at top, who also seem really fucking miserable because they're constantly accumulating resources to fill some void. That's maybe we'll just ask a couple questions about that, but you can't.
How dare.
No, actually, I did a bad. How dare.
Truly. Actually, this morning before I hopped on here, I was, of course, scrolling Facebook, and there was a meme that came up that was just somebody's tweet of Have we ever thought about just making it easy to exist? Like, have we just like let that ever be an option? But this is part of, I totally agree. Like, independent thought is never supported, rewarded, encouraged in the church or otherwise. But that flies in the face of just so many norms, so many constructs, so many systems, that it does not even compute to people to be thinking that way, to be to consider that an option, let alone do anything about it. But this is so much a part of why I'm so glad you said like the false binary, like false dichotomies, bullshit binaries. This is such a thing that comes up in therapy with people, is like starting to break that down. And that we are so often, again, presented with it's this or it's that. It's got to be capitalism or whatever, socialism. It's got to be like this bullshit that I think I think about this in the context of also like the roots of the church of good and bad. There is good and bad. There is moralizing of all these choices. There is black and white, all or nothing, this or that thinking that is inherent in not only the church, but in our society, in our systems, in all of it. But what cracks me up about this, one of the many reasons that I don't get on board with cognitive behavioral therapy is the cognitive distortion that is acknowledged in the field of psychology of all or nothing, black or white thinking. It's acknowledged that that is not an accurate way to think about things. But so few people in the field of psychology and in this whole industry, in this whole field, will see that that is happening in everything that we do, in every single thing in society, in psychology, even, that there is good and bad, there is this or that.
Yes.
So it will never not be amusing to me that that is acknowledged as distorted thinking, but we live it and breathe it, and it is in everything that we do here.
I mean, first of all, I love any shade thrown at conventional models of therapy, because again, I think so much of it, and we've had plenty of, conversations about this, talked about this with Jenny, like to look at a disease model of psychology is flawed, period. Yes, people can have certain misfirings in their brain, certain chemical imbalances that can be ameliorated with medication and with treatment. But we live in a society that is truly mad, right? The idea that we get up every morning, we go to work to have alienated labor so that other people can profit off of us, so that we can then buy food that we're alienated from because it's just packaged. We don't know how it gets there. Again, we have clothes. We don't know how it gets here. All the labor that goes into manufacturing and delivering all of this stuff. We are alienated from absolutely everything. And for the most part in human society, we have not lived like this, right? People were growing their own food. They at least knew where it came from, right?
They knew the farmer. Yeah,
they knew the farmer, they knew the weaver, they knew the shoemaker, like, because you were all living in these towns, and it wasn't this mind-boggling, like, okay, well, we're going to harvest this food in Morocco, and then we're going to ship it to Mexico, and then we're going to package it there, and then it gets distributed wherever around the world, right? And again, if you really think about it, it's like, why are we doing any of this? Again, so much of life, if you really think about it, you're like, why are we doing this?
Man, this is colonization at its finest. Like, that is it. That is the detachment from all of it, the depersonalization of all of it.
Yes.
That's it.
That's it.
But
exactly.
But again, it's just convenience. Now, like, granted, I want to make caveat here, because like, I gotta admit, like, do I order shit from Amazon? I do. That is also because there is something important about convenience for people who do not have accessibility to other things. So like, I want to make that caveat, but
yes,
that should not be the standard. there should, like, the fact that that is the standard is convenience over all else. That is the primary value, but it's not even. It's like convenience is the red herring, is the, like, we're selling it as this, but it's just to push all the profits up and at everyone else's expense who is working for the machine.
Oh boy, I've written a bunch of, my thoughts are racing right now. I've written some frantic words, but first of all, this idea of convenience. It's like, okay, convenient for you. How many people have been inconvenienced by your choices, right? Again, we have these right, from the delivery drivers who are like working late on holidays, to the people at Amazon who are packing your orders, to the people in the global south who are working for poverty wages to make cheap shit for you so you can have convenience. Again, we don't think about this wave of convenience. I also am thinking about the response to COVID, especially, right? It is inconvenient for me to wear a mask, so fuck the 27% of the population that's disabled.
I'm just gonna have a drink of this tea right here.
And this is, I mean, I feel like we started out talking about this, like people misusing, and I don't even think it's necessarily intentional most of the time, but like this concept of there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean that you well, fuck it, I can't be ethical, so I fuck trying, right?
Listen, I'm glad you said that. Yeah. It's hard to resist that,
right? But
and I'm glad that you said that.
Yes, that I feel like is how a lot of people are translating it. And it's like, okay, cool. Again, people who have accessibility issues, people who are poor, I don't begrudge people who don't have means, who are shopping at Walmart or shipping things through Amazon. You know, if you can't leave the house, you need shit delivered to your door, because again, we don't have social structures in place that protect people who are marginalized, right? I don't begrudge you that. But if you can make different choices and you aren't making different choices, you're being morally and ethically lazy. And if that's the choice you want to make, that's fine. But then don't fall behind these like pithy bumper sticker sayings in order to justify your actions.
Yeah.
I think, again, I'm an Aquarius. I think a lot of morality really boils down to, do I want to do this or not? But at least be honest with yourself that that's what you're doing.
Oh, I mean, yeah, COVID is the prime example of this, because as soon as the mandate to care about other people was lifted, could people be bothered? Largely, no. Largely, as soon as there was permission to not protect other people, to not be mildly inconvenienced by wearing a mask, didn't happen.
It didn't happen. And it strikes me, I think there's also this current that people aren't talking about, I haven't heard a lot about, but I think this, because people are so alienated, this is going to be kind of a ramble, but I promise
I'm with you.
Relates. After the past several years of politics, the rise of fascism, the lack of pushback, especially at a governmental level, to these insurrections, right? Mm-hmm. And then with the pandemic, watching all of the institutions fail willfully, through incompetence, whatever you want to say, that people had this cognitive break and have fallen into a nihilism that they're not even aware of. Because really, if you don't want to wear a mask for other people, okay, this is a level 3 biohazard, right? Like when this is studied in a lab, there are major biohazard protections that the researchers use so they don't get infected with this thing, right? It has been shown to disrupt the immune system, there is a potential for wreaking havoc on people years, decades from now that we have no idea of.
Yep.
And you're not going to wear a mask to protect yourself,
even yourself,
from that.
Yep.
You must want to die. And I don't, and I want to step away from that idea of like the Freudian kind of thanatos, right? With that death instinct. It is because you are aware of everything is a lie. Everything the institutions don't fucking care about you. Nothing is real. And you're just like, how do I escape from this pain? I'm just going to ignore and avoid and whatever. If I get COVID, it's just the flu. Well, if I get sick and I die, whatever. Really? 1 million people in the US alone have died, right?
Well, right. There's that is not anywhere in our consciousness anymore. Quickly pushed all of that aside. Yeah. It's interesting that your theory here about nihilism, because I also want to try to not treat people as monolith and like make space for multiple motivations and realities in here.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are those people that you're talking about for sure. I feel like I have seen more than I've seen that the systems are broken and don't support me. So I have some sort of a death wish idea, is that I know that the systems don't support me. I know that the adults who are in charge are not making the decisions to care about and protect us the way that they should. And that feels so familiar that I'm going to dissociate, that I'm going to I can't go near it. that I'm so used to the adults in charge not making the decisions that I'm falling into the trauma response, that whatever that has been, if it has been dissociating, if it has been absolving, if it has been fill in the blank, that I think that people's trauma responses are showing.
That I'm going to be thinking about that all day. I can't even form a coherent sentence at this point, because it's that, right? That trauma response, right? Fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And I think you have a lot of, again, it's like, well, the government said I don't have to wear a mask anymore. It's like, you trust the government now? Like, really?
When I just talked to a class last week, 2 weeks ago, about this. Oh, that was like the point by point of the thing was like, we were not trusting. When did we start trusting again? Why? Because the medical people, the scientists, the immunologists, the virologists, they never thought that these recommendations were a good idea. We knew this a year ago when Omicron hit, that whichever was last
Delta?
Delta,
no, maybe it was there's been so many.
Brain fog, whatever. The one that hit around the holidays last year.
Yeah.
That everybody was joking about the recommendations being so lax. But then what happened? Why? Yeah. And I think it's just I'm over it. I'm over masking. I'm over the calculations. I'm over the testing. I'm over it.
And this too, again, since we're talking about trauma responses, I think gets into something I've spent a lot of time thinking about lately, and this idea of cultural narcissism, because that kind of petulant response, I'm over it. I don't want to deal with it anymore. Like, that is what toddlers do. And again, anytime I look at somebody and the more narcissistic they are, then my first thought is always, oh, you started getting abused really early because you didn't develop cognitively to have empathy for any other fucking person on the planet, right? I don't want to. I don't fucking care if you don't want to. Like, your actions are going to cause the deaths of other people, period. Period. Like,
but oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
I was gonna say that that is a level of individualism that I wish was acknowledged. I wish was recognized. Mm-hmm. In part because the number of people who claim to be Democrats, leftists, and claim to care about all of this intersectionality, care to claim about, that's not, you don't get to be both. Like, you don't get to say, I don't give a shit. I can't be bothered. I can't whatever. When it's convenient, then I will care for other people. Like that again is this like convenience is I want to show up I want to support people. I care about people, but not like that. But not like that.
Okay. I have to write down anti-oppressive framework, because that is something that I have been thinking about a lot lately. So one, the raging individualism. Again, that is something that our society loves. And so it gets lionized, right? And as long as it's within certain bounds, right? And we're all taught that that's what we're supposed to do. Again, you pull yourself up by the bootstraps. This idea of you existing in a vacuum is, again, somehow there's some greater power in that. So that I just wanted to say. But the other thing is this idea of like anti-oppressive frameworks. If you are really interested in, as a lot of leftists claim to be, dismantling systems of oppression and abuse and creating a better world, but you can't put a fucking mask on to, again, protect 27% of the population. I've been doing research on disability, and that it's 27% of the population. And again, if you are marginalized and from a different like from multiple marginalizations, right? Those incidences are higher in Black communities and queer communities, all of that. You can't claim to care about doing the work if you can't even put a fucking mask on. To me, it's, again, disabled people get left out of the conversation so many times. I think in a lot of cases because disabled people can walk among us and you can't tell.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And again, invisible illness is also a lot harder to deal with in the doctor's office, because like you look okay, like cool, I'm sleeping all the time. And
how much time do we got? Because I could
as much time as you want, lady.
Damn. That is I've got so many trains of thought happening at once right now.
Yeah.
I have often talked about and felt that I am like in the middle and not belonging. But again, that's like false dichotomy type of shit. Is like I feel myself in this middle space of not quite here and not quite here, and on the periphery of this and periphery of that. That has so much been my experience with long COVID now, is because it's still getting understood what even it is. Most doctors do not have a handle on what it is. But yeah, the invisible illnesses or dynamic disabilities, where one day you might be totally just obliviated and the next day you can function relatively well. There is no understanding of that in society. There is no belief in that, even that like either you're disabled or you're not. And the idea about what is disabled is, again, very narrow and very particular. And there's so much that I've been kind of confronting in the circles that I'm now starting to be a part of chronic illness and disability. And it's so disheartening to hear people talk about all of the ways that they confront this, of not being believed or being dismissed, because if you show up to a doctor's appointment and it's a good day and you either present yourself, put on some makeup, do your hair, do whatever, and you made it there on time and you can speak coherently because you're not having brain fog that day or whatever, then, well, you must be not that bad.
Yeah, you're not sick enough.
But if you show up and you are disheveled and you are foggy and you are in pain, so you're cranky and any of those things, then, well, you're not a good patient, you're non-compliant, you're not following through on recommendations. Why can't you do your sleep hygiene and whatever bullshit gets recommended to like fix these problems? And there is there's so little room for just understanding that that push-pull of some days I'm this and some days I'm that. And just because I can show up to an appointment, just because I can go out and socialize on a given day, does not mean that I am well, because you're not seeing behind the scenes. Like Thanksgiving Day, went for a walk, came home and cooked, ate food, slept for 4 hours. 4 hours before I could have dessert, which is fine. But like,
yes.
But like the amount of time that I now have to rest in preparation for any sort of exertion, and then afterwards, like I am pre-napping, do the thing, and then I will sleep for sometimes 10 or 12 hours that night after doing something. But yeah, that's not acknowledged as long as I can make myself perform ableism, perform ableness, then you can't be that bad. You must not be that bad.
Oh my God. This too, that I think people don't realize unless they are chronically ill or unless they're disabled, is the amount of time and energy that is devoted to what you're saying, to rationing your energy, rationing your time, planning. Like, okay, so if I want to go for a walk around the block before I go to my doctor's appointment, before I am doing my work for the day, can I sleep for 12 hours or 16 hours tonight to recover from all of that? And that it is that constant mental math is also exhausting. And
that's
you're
a lot of
adding
spoons right there.
Right.
Yeah.
You're project managing your own energy for the day.
Completely.
And that, and again, I don't think that there's a lot of attention given to that. Also, what struck me so much that I hadn't thought about before is the connection between how we treat disability and how we treat grief. Because
absolutely. Been thinking that for 2 years now.
Yep. What? Yeah. Wow. This idea that like, if you're going through the worst loss of your life, but one day you have a good time and you laugh, suddenly you're over it, right? Or if you're grieving the loss of a partner and suddenly you start seeing somebody else, you're suddenly over it. And again, right, you can't be too disheveled. You have to kind of comport yourself enough. But I'm just mad about it. It's dredging up a lot of stuff. But this idea of, again, we were talking about like your performing ableness, right? Like having to perform a certain amount of grief, but not too much, right? People want to see that you're sad and know that you're sad, but they also don't want to actually see the real depths of that sad, but not like that. Exactly. Because then they'll tell you that the person is in a better place, or they'll tell you that you'll be okay someday because they can't handle you being so dysregulated. And then again, I'm thinking in terms of the project management. It's like, who can I tell that I'm so depressed that I haven't been able to get out of bed because of the loss of this person? That who can I tell that I've been crying all day? Who can I actually call who will hear me cry, or who will come over and be there for me? And you're running down this list, and then you're dealing with the exhaustion of knowing it's two people, maybe. And then who can I actually talk to about this and not dump too much on one person, because they can't be the only person that hears about this. I mean, thankfully, I've had a good therapist off and on for the past 10 years, so that really helps. But again, that amount of regulation. And then again, this idea of performing grief, eventually people just expect you to be done. Why aren't you done being sad? Why can't you just get over it? Because again, I think much like people not wanting to think about disability and the potential for disability and the potential for how disability can change the framework of your life, they don't want to think about how grief changes who you are fundamentally as a person.
It is all the avoidance of the reality of lack of control.
Yes.
People will die, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
You will age and lose some capability, there's nothing you can do about it.
Right.
Can you take care of yourself? Yes, you can. But here's that ableist, healthist bullshit, which is this idea that if you do enough, you will prevent bad things from happening. If you take care of yourself in the right ways, you will stay well. There is zero acknowledgement of shit that's going to come along, and you get hit by a bus, you get cancer, you get whatever, fucking long COVID, you get this stuff that no matter what you do, you may still get sick, you may still get disabled, you may still get some disease, you may still get, but there's not, that does not exist. And part of, I hear that in, when I talk to people about long COVID, initially it was like, you know, the same old get better soon thing, which is again, not a frustrating thing as a chronically ill person to hear, because I'm not gonna get better soon, or we don't know when that's going to be, if that's going to happen. But over time, as it hasn't gotten better, now it's changed to like, well, you've just got to believe that it will get better. And we might not know yet, you know, what it is that's gonna unlock the treatment for long COVID, but they'll figure it out. Like, okay, are you the scientists gonna figure that shit out? Because you're being awfully optimistic about something that you know fuck all about. And like, that's that toxic positivity shit of, you can't sit with the discomfort and the reality of, you don't know what to say. You don't have a way to take this pain away. And I'm not asking you to. All I want is some acknowledgement of like, man, that sounds rough. Like, that would be plenty. That would be fine. But that is rarely, maybe like 2% of what I get from people is, that sounds rough. It is it'll get better. Have you tried this thing? Have you tried that thing? What about that thing? What about this? I read something that said that this could help. And like, listen, I do appreciate, I know that people are trying to come from a good place. Is it possible that they've stumbled upon something that I haven't done in all of my research? It is.
You are a Virgo though, so probably not.
I'm a neurodivergent Virgo. So there's not a lot I haven't gotten my hands on yet. But yeah, just this bypassing of discomfort is the exact same feeling I had with grief. That there are so few people who can sit in that with you. There's so few people who can actually attend to the real needs there. And, you know, as you were talking, I know that you know this, but I want to, this keeps coming up. This came up in a Facebook group recently about how when I was in like the throes of grief and not doing a good job taking care of the house at the time, and was trying to talk to, at the time, one of my closest friends about what had been going on and how just hard it was to function and do basic shit. And like, all of my spoons, all of my energy was spent for my job, taking care of people. And then when I got home at the end of the day, that was it. I was done and could not do basic stuff. But two of the most hurtful things came out of that conversation. One is, well, the last time I saw you, you seemed fine. Again, this idea of like, if you have a good day, well, then you must be over it. You must be fine. And then as we kept talking about it, they said, okay, well, then maybe I'll come over sometime and we can clean together and I can help you. Honestly, the most helpful thing anybody could offer at the time. The problem is, ghosted, never heard from her again. And every single time that I saw her in a social setting, acted like I didn't exist. Like, literally would avoid me at all costs. So does that make me want to ask people for help? No, Like that was the Facebook group, was like, why don't people ask other people for help? I'm like, well, let me give you some examples.
Exactly.
It's really hard to ask for help for some people. And when you do, if that's what you are met with, why would I? It's so hard. Even when you try to judge, I think this is the person I can get this from.
Yeah. Oh God. Exactly. And then it's all of those additional griefs on top of just the loss of the person. And I never hear anybody talking about that. All the friends you lose, all the relationships that shift. So your sense of who you are, all of that changes.
Yep.
Also, again, I wrote down several points. One, this idea of, again, if you have a certain trauma background, it makes it really difficult to ask for help in the first place. Two, this idea of neurodivergent masking, right? You must be fine. It's like, oh, bitch, I've spent an entire lifetime making people think things about me that aren't true because nobody wants to see who I actually am. So yes, of course, I seem fine. Also, again, it's always mind-blowing to me when people say things like this, because like, haven't you at any point put on a face so you could just go out and be in public for a while? And
they don't know that's what they're doing.
Oh, I keep forgetting. There's like 5 people who are truly self-aware. That's it.
So many people really don't know that that's what they're doing.
Well, and again, that idea of like bypassing of discomfort, one of the many things that I wrote down. I don't want to think about that, because again, that reminds me of when I was a kid and I had to develop these strategies in the first place. And I don't want to face that trauma because I don't know how to face that trauma. And it's also been so long where I have developed these adaptive techniques to not face that I am extra scared to do so now.
Yeah.
But also this idea of not asking, not like, it's again, it's so impossible. It's impossible to describe. Also, toxic positivity, because a friend of mine also said that about long COVID. Well, doctors are going to figure out how to treat it. It's like, okay, you have a lot of faith in doctors, right? And doctors and scientists, which is really interesting because the doctors and scientists right now are telling you to wear a fucking mask in public, and you're not doing it because it's just a cold.
Yeah.
Again, I'm an Aquarius. Whatever you want to believe, baby, go for it. But at least be logically fucking consistent.
Nah. Nah.
They're right about this thing, but not this thing. Not this thing that personally inconveniences me in the moment, but is actually not an inconvenience. You just have to make a simple adaptation, but whatever. I don't get to pretend that things are normal, and I want to pretend that things are normal. How dare you wear a mask in public, because then I can't pretend that things are normal again. Oh yeah, of course I went to a Christmas dinner. I mean, a fourth of us got COVID, but that's fine.
Yeah, that's fine. There's a known risk. It's,
it's just a cold.
I gotta come back to that. The blind faith in the medical system is mind-boggling, and I guess that's because I have been like in and out of doctors' offices for much of my life. Not like I have the last few years. This has been its own monster, but like I have some experience with the medical systems, enough to know they don't know everything. But the number of people who are I guess, just have this blind faith in medical systems is interesting. And to me, it speaks to, I guess, actual health privilege of like, you don't know enough yet. You have not had the unfortunate experience of needing to get answers and needing treatment when it's not as clear cut as you have been made to think that it is. I don't know, but I got into a little bit of a thing in the therapist group recently about that, because there were I am, we've talked about the nervous system and polyvagal theory and how the vagus nerve and the nervous system influence a lot of things in our body. This is that notwithstanding, that is not the answer for everybody's physical woes. And so there was this conversation about someone who had gone to a doctor for some concerns, was given a clean bill of health, and then what should the therapist recommend for a certain set of symptoms? And everyone was like, EMDR, you know, some sort of somatic therapy, whatever. Those are not bad ideas. Those are not bad ideas. But I was the only person that was like, hey, and also, if they want to get a second opinion because they don't feel they were heard, like, ask them if they felt they were actually heard, validated, if there was testing done, if there was something that got to that outcome, versus I can't tell you the number of times myself and multiple chronically ill people will go to a doctor and just immediately be like, well, that's probably nothing, or it's probably this, or we did a blood test and it's not this thing that I know to look for, so I can't help you, you must be fine. That equation of, because the thing that I know to look for is not the thing, it equates you must be fine,
Right.
is so false and so demoralizing when you're in that position.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't understand how common that is.
I wrote down multiple notes. Again, I just keep thinking in terms of, because you mentioned health privilege, but also we have all been raised on this steady diet of medical dramas where doctors work as hard as fucking possible.
Oh, that's a really good point. Yeah.
Yep. That's the whole episode, that these scrappy doctors are trying to figure out what these rare illnesses are, and they do run all these tests and work around the clock and don't sleep in order to figure that out. That, by the way, I'm going to look directly into the camera, is not the case. It is not the case. It is so rare to find a doctor who actually asks questions and tests before diagnosing, and then does more tests if they don't figure it out right away. I have only met 2 doctors like that in my near 40 years on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, I think that if somebody had a relatively healthful childhood, they didn't get and aren't chronically ill, then they don't know what the reality of going to doctors is like. Because again, I had a ton of sinus infections when I was a kid, and they just threw amoxicillin at me, just constantly, more and higher doses, to the point that I need Augmentin every time I have a sinus infection, because the baby stuff doesn't work
anymore.
It doesn't work anymore. Exactly. And I've also been in situations where I had a medical mystery, and the number of doctors who are just like, we don't know. Like, that's an answer. Like,
that is it, period.
Yeah, exactly.
Not ellipsis, not comma, not semicolon, period.
No, period. Can I have my $200 now? That's it. That's it, right? They spend maybe a couple minutes with you, and that's it. So yeah, it is chilling to me to see people talk about, again, this faith in this medical system, which again, okay, so you want to talk about how great doctors are and how great these researchers are. Who do you think is still going to be in the field when a whole bunch of doctors and nurses are A, dying, and B, leaving the field because of burnout, because
or disabled by long COVID?
It's another one. Exactly. Like, what do you think they're going to be able to do? Like, again, between long COVID and major trauma, where again, doctors around the country for years have been saying distance, mask, wear better masks, stop getting together in holiday groups, stop traveling, stop everything. And people have just been like, no, but I want to. And that trumps any medical advice. Oh, but they'll save us later. That too.
But that's how we do things.
I was about to say that I think I'm just like, there's this greater social issue of like, oh, well, I can fuck it up, but someone will fix it for me later.
The planet is not in good shape, hasn't been in good shape, but it'll get sorted out. Somebody at the 11th hour will find a way. No, yeah, we are so entitled. We are so not willing to look at the realities. But again, that is the avoidance of discomfort.
Yes.
To sit with that reality is too much.
Yes.
So it doesn't happen. It doesn't
Yes.
happen. It's avoided at all costs, whether it be the fate of the planet or the medical system or somebody's personal grief or whatever it is. If it's too much for me, I'll just avoid it.
And I'll bury my head in the sand until somebody fixes it, because somebody, of course, will fix it, right? That a weird appeal to authority, but only when it benefits me after the fact. When I was on Twitter earlier, there was a study going around and it was talking about how sperm counts have decreased dramatically, something like 60% in the past 45 years. And thankfully, because I've curated my feed, a whole bunch of people are like, yeah, maybe it's because we have toxic, like forever chemicals and microplastics in our blood. I remember when that study came out and everybody was talking about it. And then again, they just like memory hold it. It was like, nope, I can't deal with this, because it is, again, the problems that we're facing right now are completely overwhelming. We do not have the faculties to deal with it. And especially in the context of one, because we're raised, and this I think ties back to this idea of childhood trauma, right? We're raised to believe in authority and respect authority at all costs.
At all
and
costs.
They will figure it out. Well, I voted for these people and put them in office, they'll figure it out, right? Or these people went specifically to school for it. They're experts, they figured it out. Like the idea that you are on your own, that the people in charge are going to do nothing. Again, I remember with first with the Trump impeachment, and now, of course, with the January 6th insurrection stuff, like they're going to get them, they're going to get them, they're going to get them. Like, how many years? How many years, right? And there are still people who are just like waiting for it to work itself out. It's like, I hate to break it to you, the people in charge actually don't give a shit about you. They don't give a shit about anything except all the money that they're hoping to get to, I guess, pay for their bunker in the climate apocalypse. Like, I don't know what the end game is there necessarily, but it's also, I think, not thinking about the future, or thinking about it in the most nihilistic, like cynical way of like, well, I'll just get mine, and then when I die, who gives a shit about anyone else on this planet?
Yeah,
who cares? You know, it's such a there's so many different philosophical and social systems that are reinforcing this inability to look at how fucked we are in so many different ways. And it's a shame, because if we really all came together to think about it, like we could all figure out a way out of this, but we'd all have to talk about it in a meaningful way and take accountability, and also be vulnerable in our complicity in it, and then really take stock of the ways we would have to change in order to make the world a better place. And again, everything in society is teaching us not to have those questions or conversations.
Yeah. And this is, you're touching on what has been one of the hardest pills for me to swallow, has been, I think I'm a realist. I'm not an optimist. I don't think I'm a pessimist, but I think that I'm a realist.
Yeah.
I also get really disappointed a lot. So there is some idealism in some of that also that I want to acknowledge, but I'm a Virgo, that's there. Neurodivergent Virgo, we got our idealism.
That's another Aquarius Virgo thing that nobody talks about.
This is why we get each other. But I think the hardest thing for me in the last, one of the hardest things socially, has been during the pandemic. Things got flipped on their head really fast. Everything slowed down. There was enough of a pause for people to have enough recognition, to have that space mentally, emotionally, to think about, hold on, wait, I don't have to commute. I don't have to spend so much of my time doing that thing or getting ready for work or looking a certain way or wearing heels or whatever bullshit was happening. Like, wow, this is like, pandemic isn't great, but like this new way of doing things is kind of okay. heard this across the board. Now, granted, our frontline people did not have that option.
Yes.
All of the acknowledgement that they were not allowed those conveniences.
Yes.
But largely, it stopped society,
Mhm.
created space for people to realize there's another way to do things.
Yeah.
That to me is why there was protests.
Yes.
Why some
Mhm.
of this stuff came to the surface in a way that had not been able to happen, I think, because people are so
Mhm.
bogged down in the grind of just doing the things I got to do in the day, get
Mhm.
home, rinse,
Mhm.
repeat.
Mhm.
Do the work, get home, rinse, repeat.
Yes.
And until things slowed down enough, people did not have that emotional space to not just be immediately overwhelmed with, oh, fuck, white supremacy is bad. Racism is bad. This is, and it's so bad that I got to just like nope out because I don't have space for that right now.
Mhm.
There was enough space for people to sit with that, I think, in a
Mhm.
way that they could not.
Mhm.
And this is what's hard. Having all of these conversations with people in 2020, 2021, there was this glimmer of hope of, oh, we don't have to subject ourselves to the daily grind. We can ask for things, demand things, say no to things.
Mhm.
We can maybe look at some things that have been hard, change some systems, do some personal accountability, hold systems and people in power accountable. Great. And then I guess people didn't have to do that anymore. I guess that was part of mandates going away, was like, well, now I can go back to normal. And those of us who have seen things maybe differently knew that normal was not the thing to get back to, wanted normal not to be the thing to get back to.
Yes.
But I'm already seeing, it has been the case that companies are pulling people back into the office.
Mhm.
Companies are pulling people back into traveling for work more than they had been.
Mhm.
All of that stuff that allowed the space and the gravity of things to settle in,
Mhm.
it's getting taken away, and people are okay with it. People are okay. I swear, I'm like, I had conversations. You all said you were never going to commute again. You were never going to do these things again. And now you're doing it again. We could do better. We could demand things. We had power. We had that. And I just don't know if it's what made it so not sustainable.
I think about this a lot because I think about how social movements don't have the longevity that I feel like they used to. And I think about like, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and granted they have some racism issues. We got to talk about it another time, but like the work to get the women's vote took 75 years. For 75 years, that bill was brought to Congress and it was shot down, and then it finally got through. The civil rights movement, that was years. That was years upon years, decades of work, right? Then you have something like Occupy Wall Street, which or the protests against the Iraq invasion, right, during W's term. There's no, it's so wild. It's like all that we have taught people about the 60s or about social movements is the end goal and not the progress that happened, the process, exactly. Or we've only taught them about protests, but what it actually means to protest. Like something that I saw, I can't even remember what documentary, but about the Black Panthers. And it was like, oh, the issue wasn't that the Black Panthers were Black men who were armed. It was that they were doing mutual aid. It was about deconstructing these capitalist systems, these white power systems. That's what we can't handle. We can't have anybody questioning what's actually going on.
Don't subvert that shit. Oh my God.
And I don't care if this is conspiracy mongering. I absolutely think this is why they started trying to get people back to work, so they wouldn't wouldn't be thinking about these things. And I think, again, is also why they dropped mask mandates, because then they could go back to this idea of the performance of normal, and that comfort, that convenience, that devil's bargain that people have taken, rather than doing the depth work, that analysis, that interrogation. And again, I hate people for that, but I don't necessarily blame them for it, because we don't live in a society that fosters those conversations. Again, if you really question these things in a meaningful way, people look at you like you're some frog person or something that just emerged from the mud, and they're like, we don't know what you're saying, but we don't like it. Go back into the mud.
Yeah.
But again, I find, I grew up with people who were chronically miserable, and they just kept doing their lives. And I learned from that, like, I can't do that. So if I'm in a situation and I'm uncomfortable for a long enough time, like, cool, burn it all down, start again somewhere else. That's just what I do. And, you know, like, if it doesn't seem like a good situation, or if it hits some sort of old trauma, like, this is bad for me, actually, I'm going to leave. So it's hard for me when people are like, wow, this was really bad. I had a breather from it. It's to really face how bad it was. Guess I'm going to go do that again. Like, what? But, you know, it's miserable and misery making. And you're just going to re-up on that when you know something else is possible. You might not have a coherent idea of what else is possible, but you know a different world is possible.
Yeah.
You're just going to abandon that because you're scared?
Well, and that's where, again, I think of the trauma response, which or nervous system response. It doesn't necessarily even have to be trauma, but like trauma and stress, our bodies don't know the difference between them sometimes. So is the stress of the last several years still with people? Absolutely. I wish that was being acknowledged at all, and it's not. But like poor flight attendants are like asking for protections from people going ballistic on them for a reason, because people's nervous systems, they're so agitated, so wound up. Or the opposite end is the shutdown. And that is where I feel like people ended up after, not even after, because we're still in a pandemic.
We're still in it.
After a couple years of the pandemic, that it is hard to maintain. And like, if I'm able to tap into my most generous self, I understand this, that like it is hard to maintain that level of stress and awareness and keep taking all of that in, to the point where people are gonna get outside their window, their nervous system sweet spot, and either end up super agitated and like restless and hectic energy, or shut down, and or combination of both, which is where I think a lot of people kind of live, is the got to keep up, got to do the thing, got to do the and then crash, and then do it all over again. But that sweet spot, that window of like calm, collected, able to think clearly, able to be in touch with my values, able to be in touch with these things, that is very hard to maintain. And when people have been through significant trauma or significant stress, and again, pandemic, collective trauma, not getting talked about, collective trauma, that window, that sweet spot gets smashed, because you spend so much time on either side of it. It's hard to find that spot. And again, I think that like slowing down is the only way to really find that spot and cultivate that spot getting bigger again. I talk to clients about that being like a car jack, of like you get that window back open again so that you can find it more frequently. But that's not what our society is ever going to encourage us to do. To slow down, to intentionally seek that out, you've got to subvert some shit. You've got to resist some shit. And that is both hard and the only way.
Again, I don't think it's a surprise that one of the ways that you can keep from getting long COVID is by fucking resting a ton. I mean, literally, when I caught COVID, I was just like, I'm going to be in bed for 3 weeks. And even then I was just like, and I'm not going to do much moving at all for the next couple months.
Yeah.
And now I feel like my immune system is finally like regulated ish. Again, I don't know what other stuff is going on.
Yeah.
But that we live in a society again, and we live in a society that requires us to be busy at all times.
Exactly.
Because if we start thinking about it, then you're going to be thinking like, is this really what I believe? Is this really what I want to chase?
Yep.
Is this what I want to do with my time? I am only on this planet for a certain amount of time. And even if there's reincarnation, I'm not going to know. I'm going to be a different person. So maybe I should honor this little bit of precious time I have on this planet.
Yeah, that is makes me think of one of my favorite narrative therapy. It's not just a narrative therapy question, but narrative therapy is where I learned how to ask some really incisive questions and deconstruct things, which is the busyness, the hecticness, the pace at which things exist. Who benefits from that? It ain't us. Yes. And again, and seeing value in that. I mean, that's one of the things that I've had to work through a lot with Tova, where she's just like, okay, I know it's really nice to live in that like manic space, but do you need it? I'm like, no, but I want it. She's like, okay, well, maybe let's step back and look at that too. Like, of course you do, because the alternative is trash.
Jeez, right? I gotta manipulate my brain chemicals somehow. So if people want to find you and follow you online, where can they do that?
Yeah, they can find me at inkwellpsychotherapy.com. I'm also mostly on Instagram, not so much on Facebook, but I do have a page there. And then I'm going to start offering in the new year some things for misfit mental health, which are going to be geared towards helping people like reconnect with their inner voice and intuition, because I find that these things we're talking about keep pulling people into directions that are not genuinely them, and want to keep helping people to reconnect with that authenticity and not have to mask, at least sometimes. And also some practices to be resisting these systems of just like conformity and complacency, so that there is space to be ourselves, to be back in touch with some of these things that we value and want to be making positive changes for ourselves and each other and in the collective.
Amazing. Well, I will link all of that in the description, both on YouTube and in the podcast, so people can find you.
Fabulous.
Yay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much for listening and or watching, depending on where you found this podcast. Again, if you want to find Steph, you can follow her online at inkwellpsychotherapy.com. She is Inkwell Psych on Instagram. Sign up for her mailing list, take a workshop, her New Year's Day workshop. The registration is closed. I will be there high in advance to anyone else is going to be there too. And if you want to keep track of Personal Pans, I'm on Instagram at Personal Pans, same as Twitter, as long as Twitter is still around. I also just recently created a Mastodon instance called weirdo.network. I'm there at Personal Pans Podcast and at Cully Butterfly. Come join us. It's pretty nice so far. Anyway, I wish you nothing but good things in the new year. And I hope that you have a very playful and curious day.